The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, my name is Jillian Schaefer and I'm the Marketing Coordinator for SWK Technologies. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar, Sage 100 Tips and Tricks, presented by Bruce Kern of SWK Technologies. A little housekeeping before we get started. Everyone has been placed on mute to keep the background noise down. However, you can submit any questions you have throughout the webinar. To submit a question, look for the questions section in your GoToWebinar. We will answer all questions at the end of the presentation. We are recording this presentation and it will be distributed tomorrow to all attendees as well as to those who registered but were not able to attend. Please take a minute after the presentation to answer our one survey question. With that said, we appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to attend our webinar. We're here to help you get the most out of your software solutions and help you find an easier way to run your business by providing you software and industry knowledge, tools, and support whenever you need it. So whether you're here doing research for a new solution or you're just here to learn, we'd like to encourage you to ask any questions throughout the webinar. Lastly, as a quick reminder, SWK is constantly sharing important updates and software tips and tricks on our social media channels, so we encourage you to follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Without further ado, I'll hand it over to Bruce.
Thank you, Jolene. Let me get my screen shared here. Great. Jolene, can you see my screen?
Yep, it's coming through great.
Fantastic. Well, welcome everyone. Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. This is going to be our Sage 100 Tips and Tricks webinar today. We've got some fun stuff to show you, a lot of ground to cover. For any of you who may have attended our SWK Empower event, a lot of this material is some of the same material, but then we've expanded it for this particular session here to give you even more tips and tricks. Some of the things we're going to cover today, we're going to talk about how we can automate the update of journals and registers with a single click. We'll get into a great feature called the Task Scheduler, again, an automation feature. We'll talk about those capabilities and hopefully do a live demonstration of that. I've got a really fun one on custom specific crystal reports for a particular company where a custom report can behave very differently depending on the company that it's in. We'll do some work with lot and serial recall scenarios and the addition of a quality inspector ID field to the system, and we'll try to run that through to a report output in a recall scenario. We'll always have fun doing Excel exports, methods, and techniques. Got a lot of different things to show you there. And last but not least, if we can get to it, if the time allows, we will get into a feature with Paperless Office where a salesperson can receive a copy of their invoices automatically, similar to how customers can do that. Without any further ado, we'll jump right into our webinar. And we are dealing with the Sage 100 2020 version. Sage 100 2021 just came out in April. So there are a few little things that we'll touch on that are a little different in the 2021 version as we go through here. Now, the first tip we're going to talk about is how to automate the update of journals and registers being a single click. So to talk about that, I'm just going to use this sales order module to kind of talk about the process. So historically, everywhere in Sage that you would do an update of a transaction batch or a transaction singularly, there would be a two-step update process anywhere in the system except for the general ledger. So if you were in the sales order module, for example, and you had a batch of invoices and you were ready to update that batch of invoices, you would first run this daily sales reports and updates, which would relieve the inventory, record the receivables, record the recash, etc., in those modules. And then you would have a second prompt to run this daily transaction register, which everywhere in Sage is the register that actually updates the general ledger. That's the second part. So you get these two prompts, and a problem with that kind of structure in some cases is that for one reason or another, the user doesn't update the second register. And the problem with that is of course that our financials don't get those dollars. And frequently we get a lot of calls, around month end, somebody's reconciling their balance sheet, let's say. They go to look at the AR control account in the balance sheet, and they see that it's, missing some dollars, but they see that the AR trial balance does seem to have those dollars. And sometimes what we find is that this one or more of these daily transaction registers just didn't get updated. Now, the original design of that feature was intended to have somebody at a higher level, a controller, an accounting manager type person, be able to actually run that general ledger transaction register. Sometimes they would do that directly from the general ledger module, which would bring those in from everywhere in the whole Sage system. And they would be doing that to look for possible coding mistakes that they may need to correct. The flaw with that logic, in addition to everything else I said, was also that any fixes that they would need to make would have to be done post-mortem, meaning that they would have to go ahead and update that register anyway, and then go make a second round of entries to correct anything that they would have found. So kind of not a lot of value. So what a lot of people like to do is they've asked for us to have a way to automate that feature and just have the user click it once. So what we're going to do is show you how to do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over here to the library master module, and we're going to pull up role maintenance. Okay, and then we're going to take a look at one of our roles, and we're going to look at this accounting manager. And we're going to say, you know, we're the person that needs to be able to do this update. Now, as many of you know, looking through the security in Sage is like looking for a needle in a haystack many times. But what we're going to do is show another tip here is the search feature, kind of working on this other tip about how to automate this. So what I'm going to type here is, it depends on, you can type just about anything that you would want, but I'm just going to type the word update. I could have typed daily transaction register. I could have typed automatic. I could have typed a lot of things, but I'm just going to type update and see what I get. Now, it went and searched everything in those security menus, and it's giving me a list of everything that it found. Now, notice that the very first thing says it's an AP security event to allow the automatic update of the daily transaction register. Well, that's exactly what I'm looking for, but I need that in the sales order module. So if I scroll down here, I can see that, yep, sure enough, the sales order module does have that event. So if I highlight that and click OK, this will take me right to that task, and I can just check that off. And now the accounting manager will have that permission in the sales order module. Rinse and repeat for the other modules as desired. Now I have the admin role today, which by virtue of the fact that you see all of the checkboxes selected here means I already have that permission, so I don't need to grant it. But if I needed to, that's how I would do it. That's your first tip. Okay, now what we're going to do is see if it works. Okay, so we're going to come over here to sales order, and we're going to put an invoice in very quickly. And this VM is running a little slow. Apologize for that. Not much I can do about the speed. Okay, so we're going to get an invoice here. Pick a customer, any customer. And let's see, we'll put something on the lines. It happens to be a miscellaneous item. Okay. Now we're going to accept that. And we don't really need to print that because we're just testing the automatic update. All right, so we're going to do the daily sales reports and updates. And we'll go ahead and accept this date, 5/31/2025. This is demo data, dated 2025. And I have Paperless Office turned on here. So what I'm going to do is, rather than print this out where you can't see it, I'm going to go ahead and hit the print button here to start the update. And this should produce a PDF for us and give us our prompt that we're looking for. And this is just Sage warning us that we haven't printed those invoices. In this case, that's okay. Normally, you probably print your invoices. And here comes our paperless office producing our journal. We're going to go ahead and close that. Looks good to me. And then here we are at our first prompt. We're going to go ahead and click yes to this. And we'll watch the update process run. And as you can see, it's running the first update. And here comes that daily transaction register now without any prompt. And it just ran that all the way through. Now let's go make sure that we're not just doing tricks here, smoke and mirrors on TV. Let's go ahead and look at the AR control account and make sure that we can see that transaction and validate that. So we're going to come over here to the general ledger, and we'll pull up our account maintenance where we can get into the accounts. And we're going to go ahead and select that AR control account. Go over here to our transactions, and we're going to see if we can find that one. Probably this one. I didn't happen to write down the journal number. Well, let's drill down on this. In theory, it's the last one. And as we can see, this does have the date and timestamp from just now, here, 6/16/2021. And there's our entry posted all the way through to the general ledger. So that worked nicely for us. So just little things like that, can save some time in cases where you want to do that if you really just want it to go all the way through. Okay, so that was a couple tips in there. We're going to show you another feature that's, you don't see a lot of this. So this is called the task scheduler. So I'm going to open up this feature here and talk about this a little bit. All right, so I'm just going to kind of talk about this, and then we'll do try to do an actual example. So what you do here is you got to give your job a name, give it a description, and the job name and the description will probably be relative to something that the job does. So we're going to talk about that in a second. You provide it company code information, login information for Sage, Windows login information, and then you set a schedule. So this can be, once, monthly, weekly, daily, and you can set how many, every days it does it. You can put a start and end date on it with a time. And here's the types of things that you could potentially use this for. So here it shows journals and registers. So with journals and registers, that means I could come over here to the number 2 task tab, and I could select a module, and I could pick a journal and register to go ahead and run the update. And I could add additional rows as needed. So that's one type of thing we can do. And let me clear that one out of there. All right, another type of thing we could do is we could run a system report. Okay, so if we want to run the AR trial balance at a certain time, we could do that. We could run import jobs. Now we're actually going to try to do that today, combine the power of Visual Integrator with the task scheduler, two huge, time-saving, big-time tools for ERPs, run those together and see what kind of power that adds. And then we have the other here. So the other could be something like maybe running the build search index utility in Sage, which refreshes the list of customers and vendors and items for people when they're doing lookups for new records that have been added. All right, so let's just cancel that guy. And we're going to go ahead and take a look at a real job. And we're going to be doing a general ledger import from Visual Integrator for a journal entry into the Sage General Ledger. So currently this job is set to run at 10:16 a.m. The time says 10:15 a.m. So we're going to go ahead and accept that, and we're going to see if that runs. Now, before we do that, I'm going to come into here. and just show you that there currently is no entry there. Okay, so there's no rabbit in the hat. Now, while we're waiting, we're going to talk about the visual integrator here. So this is a little bit about the import job that we're running. So another tip in Sage is if you have this visual integrator module, this is a great automation tool or a data maintenance tool. In this case, we've defined an import job. We call it a GLJE 2-column. So it's a 2-column journal entry type of a import we're doing. And then on the configuration tab, we've simply selected the table we want to push the data into, given it a little bit of a description to help the person who's going to be using it. Here we set a file type, so there's a file out there, and this tells us exactly where that file is. This happens to be a CSV file. It's very common. And the next thing that we'll look at here is the data tab for this import job that we're trying to automate. This is kind of where we define the actual data that's supposed to be coming into Sage. So here we're assigning GJ as the source journal, and then we're reading columns 1, 2, 3, and 4 for the account numbers, the debit and credit amounts, as well as a posting comment. And you can kind of see what some of the other fields are here. So this is just a basic look at how VI works. There's some additional tabs, tab number 3, the select tab, and the number 4 records tab. Those are usually a little more advanced things for doing kind of filtering of the data. I don't have a lot set up on those for this particular job. So it looks like we have now crossed the 1016 timeline, at least on my PC. So we're going to go ahead and get out of this PowerPoint now, and we're going to go back to our task scheduler now. And the first thing we're going to do is look to see if it looks like that job ran. So the task scheduler also has a log in it that you can look at to see what the activity of the job is. And this is really coming in slow today. Apologize for that, everybody. Okay, so we're going to look up our job here. That's the one we want. And we're going to go ahead and look at this log just to see if it gives us the idea, the warm fuzzy, if you will, that it looks like this probably ran, hopefully. If not, well, live TV, we'll see. Okay, so here's our log. Let's blow this up. So it says, sure enough, right at 10:16 and 2 seconds, the job began to run. And as you can see, the log tells us as it progresses. And then the last thing that it did is tell us it was completed. So sounds like it worked, or at least from the task scheduler's perspective. Now let's go see if we actually have that journal entry in Sage. Okay, so over to the general ledger, and now we're going to go right back into the general journal entry. And we'll use the flashlight, which of course, for all of you GL users, will let us see our entries. Okay, so there's a batch. Whoop. Bear with me here. The screen's wigging out a little bit. Okay, it does have a date created of 6/16, which is today, of course. And there are totals in there, so that's pretty good. And notice the time is right at the time our task scheduler job ran. Now let's see if there's actually an entry in here. Now we can click the flashlight. There is a journal entry. And sure enough, it has our comment from our job and our debits and our credits. So there we are. It worked beautifully. All right, let's get out of that guy. And we're going to move on to your next tip. Oh, a couple comments on this task scheduler job. Kind of some cool things that you can think of doing here. So you could have, one task scheduler job say that imports the journal entries in this case, or imports an entry. using the VI. You could have another task scheduler job that actually runs the journal updates for those transactions. I have a client that I just finished a large upgrade for, and they import orders from their website using Visual Integrator, and we use the task scheduler to run that import job at 5 different intervals at scheduled times per day. So we have a different job for the same VI import, different job running at different times, and it brings those in on a nice little schedule, and then they just, you know, pick, pack, and ship them. So another way of kind of thinking about ways to do that. Now this next one is kind of fun. This is going to be about company-specific custom Crystal reports. So Sage has a ton of Crystal reports that come with the system. So we'll just kind of comment that we're not talking about those. So here's an example in sales order reports, all of the stock reports that come with Sage. Now you can modify those, you can save different report settings. That's not what we're really talking about today. What we're talking about is custom reports. So what we're going to do is we're just going to show the report that we have in here, and we're going to kind of just build on this a little bit. So accounts receivable has this credit available custom report. Now, right now we're in the AO3 company. If you look in the lower left part of my screen, and we're just going to run this report and take a look at it, what it looks like real quick like here. Now, very basic report, you know, has a, you know, handful of fields. It's got some credit information, some customer name information, you know, pretty straightforward what it is. Now that's in the AO3 company. Now when we change the company now, to any other company in Sage, such as the XYZ company, we have that same report on the menu. And we're going to run it out of XYZ now, just to kind of establish our before and our after. So what we're seeing here is the exact same layout, the exact same report, absolutely nothing different, but the data is from XYZ versus AO3. So what we're going to do is we're going to show how to have one custom report on the menu, but have that report behave very differently, or be an entirely different report for that matter, based on the company code itself. So over here, when we add reports to Sage for custom reporting, the general procedure is that the report has to be 30 characters or less in its name, and it has to end in the word custom.rpt. And the general protocol is to put those reports inside the MAS90 directory under this reports folder. And so here you can see there's this credit available custom report. That is the one that we just viewed in those two companies. Now, if I come into here, I have a different version of this report. I'm going to go ahead and just copy that, and I'm going to tuck that underneath the company that I want it to show up in. Okay, so I'm in AO3 reports now. I'm going to put that in there, and we're going to open this guy up and just take a quick look at it so you can kind of see what I did to it. And here it is. You can see I added a logo and a title. That's really all I did. A very cosmetic change for the demo today. All right, so there we go. And we've moved it under the AO3 reports. Now what we're going to do is go back and run that report again and see if it behaves differently. And sure enough, there it is. So with this technique, I could have one report on the menu, but have that report be different based on the company code by placing that report file in the company code's reports folder. So the report file does have to have the same name as its original parent under the MAS 90 reports, but that would keep me from having the need to add multiple reports to the menu if they really were just slightly different. Okay, or you could certainly add separate reports to the menu, but that's the tip on that one. All right, so something that's been, you know, a big issue with Sage 100 and in any kind of a business that has lot tracking, any kind of food industry business, a lot of other industries, is lot tracking and FDA recall things. And so Sage has added some power to the system in the last few versions to deal with that. And we're going to take that up a notch. So what we're going to do is show some customizations in a lot recall scenario, and for adding a quality inspector ID at the PO receipt of goods, that we would be able to get to that information later in, say, a recall scenario or just for information purposes. All right, so another scenario is, so we're going to just start talking about these UDFs. So we're going to jump into custom office here, and we're going to go into user-defined field and table maintenance. And we're just going to show you a few of the tables and give you the concept of what we did. And then we're going to hopefully show you some report output. Okay, so in this scenario that we're demoing today, it's a PO receipt situation, and we want to capture the quality and control inspector ID here at the PO receipt, and we want to flow that through the system. So the PO receipt tier distribution is what I call the point of capture. It's the starting point for getting this data. So I created a field called QCID for Quality Inspector Identifier, and we're just going to go take a look at this thing. So here we just told it the name, we told it the type of data we wanted it to be, we told it how long we wanted it to be, 10 characters, and we gave it a caption. This is how it will be seen once it's in the screens. Over here on the validation tab, we chose to add some validation. So this is a very powerful concept because, you know, we have the initials of our quality inspectors here, but if we didn't have this validation list and we left this as more of an open field, you know, somebody might enter JK sometimes, they might enter JFK other times, maybe just J sometimes, and we really want to enforce data validation if we want to get some kind of consistent output later for reporting purposes. So I've added a short list. In this case, I did choose to make a blank value as a valid value. I didn't have to do that, but I did. And I could make this a required field, but I don't have to. The validation list in Sage 100 here on this tab has a limit as to how many rows you can add a validation. I forget off the top what it is, but if you hit the limit, that's when you can switch over to a user-defined table, and you can also use that for validation. Another advantage to using a user-defined table is you can add other fields to the table besides just the initials. So if I wanted to get really fancy, I could have created a user-defined table, put the user's initials in as the key, and then listed first name, last name, and any other info that I wanted associated with these quality inspector IDs. Here on our data sources, there is no data source for this. This is the starting point. So this doesn't pull the data from anywhere. We're going to enter this data. So that's the starting point. And see here, we're going to show you a couple more. Here's the IM item cost table. And we're going to try to open that one up. Okay, so there's our field name, kept it the same name. That's intentional, of course. And here, we basically gave it the same first information. We don't need the validation here because that's already been established. Here is where we do need to pay attention to our data source. So here we're saying that this IM item cost table that's going to capture this quality inspector ID, it needs to get this from the PO receipt tier distribution. Now, notice that I also have connected this to the transaction distribution because you could also receive items that way. We're not really demoing that part today, but the point of mentioning it is just the fact that when you're doing customizations like this, you really have to think about all of the different ways that data might need to get into Sage and whether this customization would apply to those processes or not. Okay, so there we are. And we're going to show you a work table next. So here is a customer lot serial recall work. So the reason I'm going to show you this is not to, kill you with UDF and data tables. This one is actually sort of the ending point where we want to end up with this data, which is we want to be able to run a report that would actually show this information in it. So there is a lot recall report in Sage. And for those of you who don't know, anytime you see a table that says work, that means it's feeding data to a report. So in this case, it's the lot serial customer recall report. And this work table here just means that this is the table that Sage is going to populate the data from. So we'll need to have it here. Now, what I did is I just added the UDF and I connected this one to the lot serial transaction history. I did have a couple more tables in between there, but it's not a custom office webinar. I think you get the idea of connecting the dots in terms of the concept. Okay, now we're going to kind of see how this works a little bit. We're going to play with it. And we're going to do that by entering a purchase order. Okay, we're just going to get the next number. We don't really care who the vendor is. And we'll go ahead and put a line item on here that is a lot and serial number item. And we're going to try to use the 2480 8-50, the desk file. And we'll just order 5 of those, nilly-willy. And we'll go ahead and say accept. So our PO is ending in 44. And we'll go ahead and try to receive those. All right, here we go. Let's try to receive them. Don't you wish your goods would show up that fast? Okay, so here's number 44. We don't really care if there's an invoice number, so we're going to skip that. And here we're going to go ahead and just say yes to receive it. Now, this has a triangle because it's a lot and serial item, which means that in addition to telling it how many received, we have to provide the lot or serial numbers of the items we received. So to do that, we will get into the distribution screen here. And we're going to go ahead and pick a lot number. We're just going to use like a date code today. And I could have more than one lot. I'm just going to dump mine all in one lot. And here's my QC ID field here. So this is my point of capture. And I'm just going to type in a code, see what happens. All right, it tells me, hey, This ZZZ is not a valid code. You've got to be one of these. So in this case, I'll go ahead and be JFK today. And there it is. So I'll say accept, system satisfied, hit accept again, and we can go ahead and run our update. And we're just going to go ahead and preview this one. Now, if you wanted to, you could have added the QC ID to this journal and register as well. I didn't do that, but it's worth a mention. And we're not going to print that back order field report, but we are going to run the update. And we'll just skip the GL part in the interest of time, especially since the system's running kind of slow today. All right, now let's go look at a couple reports where we have some data here. Okay, here's the lot serial customer recall report. Stock report in Sage. Now, what I've done here is I created a new report setting, QCID, and I made it my default, so it just came right up for me. But here's the standard report. So basically what I did is I came in here and I told it, you know, give me a save as, I gave it a new name called QCID, and then I went into this designer option, and I'll just pull that up on the other one here. And I actually modified this report using this designer option in Crystal Reports. So I'm not going to open that up and show it to you. We're just going to preview the report here. And then here I've got the item pre-saved in my setting along with some dates. And we're just going to go ahead and run this and kind of see the output. So we'll blow this up a little bit. So stock report. And as we move down, we don't see a lot of data up at the top. That's demo data before I added the customization. But as we get down later into later lots, we can see that we do have the UDF field along with their initials. So these are people who were sold lots of this particular product, okay? So from something that we recorded in the past. And so if we needed to know if this was a bad lot, we could find out who did that inspection, and they may have additional notes, or we just may need to talk to them about what they know. All right, so that's an example of how to update that report. And let's see here. I think that's all we got to do. It's also nice to point out here that depending on the tables you work with, that UDF may just automatically show up in your report grid. So in addition to go ahead and filtering by the items and or the customer and or the lot, I could also zero in on a particular quality control inspector ID if I wanted to. So a nice touch. Now, for the ever popular ways to export data to Excel. Everybody loves that. Okay, so let's get into that. We get a lot of requests for this, and it's always interesting how many people have used Sage for such a long time, but they don't know about some of these things, and they are having a real aha moment once they find out. So let's talk about this. This is a common need. Let's go back to our role maintenance and see if there's anything in the security that might have something to do with Excel exports. Okay, so we're going to pull up our accounting manager here, and we're going to use the search because we don't want to navigate Sage's needle in the haystack security, and we're going to just type the word Excel. I have my cap locks on here, and we're just going to see what it finds. Sure enough, it did find something. Allow export to Excel from lookups, grids, and lists. So we're going to do all of that. So if we want to be able to do that kind of stuff, we need to grant that permission right there. So lookups in Sage are when you're in the little magnifying glass sort of icon, looking up a customer, vendor, an item, etc. Grids are, within grids, we're going to see that. So some screens in customer maintenance, data entry grids, etc. And of course, your lists. So we've got that permission is granted there. And of course, my user has the admin, has full access, so we're set to go. But that is something you might need to check off your box if you haven't verified that. Now, another consideration here is ODBC security. So let's see here. I think it says under, yeah. So you may need to turn on the ODCP security depending on what you're set up here in the system configuration. So let's take a quick look at that. So system configuration is global to the entire Sage install, meaning this would apply to all companies. So here you could enable the ODB security in role maintenance. That means a fourth tab in the role security that we were just looking at becomes active, and you can actually lock down the tables from the back end, which is of course how we're going to have to be doing that if we're going to use something like Crystal Reports to get at the data, or using Excel to get at the data outside of Sage. So we don't have that turned on, but wanted to mention that as part of our tips today. Now let's get in and do some of this. So advanced lookup engine, very commonplace, but there are some features in here a lot of people aren't aware of. So let's dive into that. Okay, so lookup screen. So here we have a customer maintenance screen. If we hit the lookup, we will see that there's an Excel button in the lower right hand area. It is lighted up, meaning it is active and I could export. So here's what we're going to do. We're gonna just show one more cool feature with this kind of a tool here, and that is we are going to do a custom view. So this is actually a custom view already. Here's the standard view. And what we're going to do is we're going to customize one here real quick to show you something kind of fun that you may not have known. So we're going to hit custom here, and we're just going to put, I don't know, I'm going to make it past due balance view. I can choose to make that my default view if I want to. And now I'm going to make a custom view, which then of course is exportable. On the right is all the fields that you already have. On the left is all the fields that you can choose from. So I'm going to scroll down here and just find some information that I'm looking for to add it and show you a kind of a fun feature. Okay, so here's our balance category stuff. So this is all dependent upon how you set your Sage up. But in this particular system, this is current balance, meaning what's not due. 1, 2, 3, and 4 are 30, 60, 90, and 120 days. So what I'm going to do is I could display that information, but what I want is a new field that will give me one field that says what's the total past balance. So I'm going to click new field, past due amount. I'm going to guess the width at 15. And this is going to be a calculated field. So I'll click the calculation builder, and I'm going to come down here and find the fields I want. And I'm going to add the 4 categories that would add up to what the total past due should be. So there they are, pretty simple formula, 1 + 2 + 3 + 4. I'm going to hit OK, and there's my past due right there. If I wanted to, I could move this up where I wanted it. And I can do all kinds of stuff in here. You get the idea. So you can use this as a little mini report writer, which is the point. Now, also, sometimes people don't know, if I scroll even further down here, I can also add information from these linked tables. Now, I don't need that, but if I needed to have something like a salesperson's name, I could get that out of the error salesperson. I could get the salesperson code from the customer master, but if I actually wanted their name, I'd have to get to the subtable. Notice that any user-defined tables also show up here. So this doesn't apply to our example, but there we go. I'm just going to hit the finish on that now. And here's our lookup, total past due balance. Here's our total past due column. If I wanted to, I could sort by that. Now I have a high to low from the past due. I could have also filtered this to say only give me the past due that are greater than 0, but whatever, you get the idea. Now I just want to see if I can export that to Excel. So all I have to do is click that button and out it comes into Excel, and there it is. And that always exports very neatly to Excel because it's kind of a grid to a grid kind of an interface. And as you see, that didn't take very long. All right, let's close that, and we don't need to save it. And that is your ALE export. Now, another great tool that Sage has added, and this might be my favorite add that they've done over the years, is the Business Insights Explorer views. So every module has an Explorer menu with its views specific to that module. But there's also a Business Insights up on the menu here, and that has an Explorer menu that contains all of the views for the entire system. So depending on how you like to get there, you can do that. And just to kind of keep it apples to apples, we'll pull up the customer view here. It's a little sluggish today. I think it's downloading Microsoft updates, so I'm going to blame Microsoft. Okay, up it comes. So not a lesson on BIE, but the idea is you can customize these, you could add formulas, you can do all kinds of crazy, wacky, good, great stuff here. I'm just gonna, get rid of a couple things I say I don't need, like maybe I don't care about this fax number, so I'm just gonna drag it off the screen. And I'm just gonna make a few minor changes here, just stuff like that. I don't care, maybe I don't care about the extension, just drag it off the screen, make whatever changes I want. And once I get what I want, you could do all kinds of grouping here. We're going to talk about how to export this. Okay, so the first lesson is that these Business Insights Explorer views have kind of two panes. They have this upper primary pane and they have the secondary pane down below. So depending on what information you're looking at, the information down below will change depending on what you're picking over here on the left. So contacts, memos, there's no memos, but if I go back to here to the sales history by period, there's some data. So the first thing to know about this is that you can only export the upper grid. The information down below doesn't export. You can drill into preview by a right click and you can export it, but just keep in mind that only the upper grid exports. Now, other key tips here is this. So if we do a file, export options, we're going to want to observe whether or not we have the selected records only checked. So if it is, there'll be a little check mark there. That just means that only the records you marked from the Business Insights Explorer grid would actually be the ones exporting. So back to the grid here, if I want to pick and choose particular records, I just hold my left control key down and I just select the records that I want. Okay, so that's how I select them if I want to pick and choose. And if I did that, I would want to do selected records only. Now in this example, I'm just going to export the whole thing. So here's my Excel option, and I'm just going to click Microsoft Excel there and let it drop these out into Excel. And there it goes. And this also exports very nicely to Excel because it's grid to grid. So there you go. Now, if you do subtotals and other things like that in your BIE, they will not be in your export. It's only the main record. So there are a couple limitations, but also a good tool, but all the same. Now, another way you can export data, and this is a bit old school for those of you who've had Sage for a long time, is to use the Visual Integrator. So, we talked about the Visual Integrator to import data and to maintain data, and we actually imported a journal entry at the beginning of our webinar. And that is by far the most common use of the Visual Integrator, but you can export data with the Visual Integrator. So here we have an export job, and we're just going to pull this guy up and take a look at it. Okay, so just like import jobs, you give them a name and you tell it what table, instead of importing to you, what data you want to get the data out. And then this says export the reorder information for apparently for inventory items. You can give it a file type. I chose a CSV. I think you can choose Excel as an option. This actually will open in Excel, so it's going to be an Excel CSV in this case. And then over here on the data tab, I told it, what data we want to export. And generally, those are the two main tabs. If you want to filter the data and stuff, you can use the select tab to do that. I didn't choose to do that. So we're going to go ahead and accept the job. And we're going to execute this job. And I have this dropping out to a file named test.csv on my desktop. You do not have to create the file ahead of time. You can just define it here in the path and it will create it. And I'm just going to say accept. And do you wish to export the records from AO3? I'm going to click yes. And out they came. And it told me, hey, I just exported 174 records. And if I wanted to look at the log, I could do that and see the information. I could drill down on those and see each individual item's information that was in the export. And as you can see, there it is. Now let's go see if we actually have some data. So that dropped out onto my desktop and it parked it right up here by my recycle bin. So if I open that thing up, bear with me. There it goes. A little sluggish today. I do think it's downloading Microsoft updates and the VM has limited RAM, but there it is. I just exported all of my reorder information. So if I needed to change some data here, let's say, I could then make the changes and re-import the data with my new reorder settings, let's say, possible example, or I could just work with the information. Okay, we're going to close that and move on to our next one. Oh, and a few warnings. If you do CSV exports, some tips to you. One, if you have items, and let's see if we can open that so we can see this, because this one, yeah, we're going to go ahead and open it. Let's try that again. Okay, so some tips here. Be careful if you do use CSV files. CSV files will strip out leading 0 characters. So right here in column C, this first row, this is the warehouse column, and that warehouse should actually be 000. The one below it should be 001 and 002 and so on. So watch out for that. It will change the data if it's a CSV file. And another thing I've seen it do is it will sometimes convert dates to funky values. So you just have to watch out for that and experiment with what works best on your system. Okay, enough said. Okay, now another really great way to export data is using crystal reports. And the key to doing this is the design. So here I've got a very basic export. This is exporting item master file information. And the key here is, lining these up and these row lockers here, these tab settings that actually lock these in. So as I have this little marker here, and I could just click add, just literally click with my mouse and it will add one, and I can just drag it off, but that's an anchor. Okay, so when you see the corners of a field, like this header field, showing in red, it means it's anchored to that anchor spot. So with this technique, I'm anchoring both ends of each field to the same anchor. Then the next field, left side, anchors to the right side of that one. So there is absolutely 0 space, and it is tucked in as tight as it can possibly be. And then I add the next field with another anchor, and the next field with another anchor, and so on. Sometimes if I have a lot of fields, I shrink these fields up. You don't have to have them wide open where you can see the entire field like I've done for today's demo. If you have 50 fields, you might have to make these a 1/4 inch wide with a whole bunch of anchors. The key is that you use that anchoring technique, and that will keep these columns kind of locked, if you will, which tends to make them export. And then the other thing I've done is I've tried to leave no space underneath my actual row data here. So these sections are as tight and as high as I can get them. There's no loose area down below. So for example, if I had this blank area down here, that wouldn't be good for exporting. It would create blank spaces in my export. Okay, so there's a couple tips on that. Now, I've refreshed the data. Here's what it looks like in Crystal. Now let's export it to Excel. So here's my export button. I can click this, and you'll have to experiment with your particular version of Excel in your particular environment to see what works best. Now, I'm just going to go with the default first Excel option. I'm going to choose application because I want it to open in Excel. And this will pop open the Excel format properties. Choose what you like. I prefer to have the grid lines, and here's a big tip. Depending on how you designed your report, the column width based on objects in the, I prefer to set this to whatever section has the data in it that I want. So that is details in our case. We have a header row and details in our particular report. So I'm going to set it to details. And I'm going to hit OK and see what happens. And out it comes, and very good. We got nice, neat columns, no blank rows, and all our data is there. So that is a little bit on how to use a Crystal report to do that. The more you format reports, the less likely they are to export cleanly to Excel. Okay, so we're not going to save our settings. All right, now what else do we have here? Oh, ODBC, how could we forget this one? This is a very popular one too. So sometimes, you don't want to export something that's in Sage. You actually just want to pull the raw data from Sage right into Excel for some reason. So here we are, we've got an Excel, just a blank Excel file, and we're going to coach you up on how to do this. And the exact steps to do this will vary with the version of Excel that you might have. So here's data. We're going to go to from other sources, and we're going to do a Microsoft query in this case. Notice this refers to ODBC, which stands for Open Database Connectivity, and Sage 100 is an ODBC compliant package, so we can use this to talk to Sage, worldwide standard for how programs talk. Here is our SOTAMAS 90 data source that we want to use. So we're going to highlight that one. We're going to click OK, and it's trying to talk to Sage already. It's wanting to know, do you have permission to talk to me to get this data that you're about to ask? So this is where that ODBC security could come in, and I'm going to give it my credentials. Going to click the OK button, and now it's going to say, hey, you're good, you're let into the door. What tables would you like to have? So let's just scroll down here and pick one. We're going to pick the AP vendor today. There it is, AP vendor. So if I wanted to, I could pick individual fields, but I'm going to bring the whole AP vendor table over by just clicking that. It just brought all of my fields over there for me. And if I wanted to, I can do filters of this information. If I want to filter the information, I don't. If I want to do sorting in Excel, I don't. I'm just a data dump here. And I'm going to go ahead and return the data to Excel. I'm going to go ahead and allow it to put in sheet A1. It wants to, again, to know, do I have permission to do this once it's pulling it out? And I'll tell it again, I do have keys to this card. And we'll click OK, and out comes the data in a nice, neat table. At this point, you could do pivot tables with the data, whatever it is you want to get at, but you have a nice, neat table in Sage. This one happens to be the vendor master file. As you can see, that wasn't terribly time-consuming or too difficult to do. So that is a good technique there. All right, and then a few more places here, just to wrap that part up, is grid screen. So let's go to a customer. There's a grid screen in the customer. I'll give you an example of what that is. So one of the things that people like to look at in Sage with customers is this history. So here is a history tab constantly getting updated as we process transactions, but this is a grid. So any grid screen in Sage, anywhere, not just this one, is a right click anywhere in the grid and export that to Excel. So if that looks interesting to me, got an error there. Sorry about that. There's some sort of compatibility issue. Let's just try that if we open Excel first. It worked the last time I tried it. The whole machine's acting a little odd today. And we'll show you one more place you can export data if this works or if it doesn't work. And we'll move on to the next one. Okay. All right, let's try that one more time just for fun. Okay, there you go. Maybe it had a hard time invoking Excel, I don't know, but that's how it's supposed to work. And let's see here. I guess we're getting short on time, so I'm going to try to show you one more thing, and then we might have to call it, but we'll see here. Let's see here. PO, data entry grid. So data entry grids can also be exported. So we'll just go into purchase order entry here, and we'll pull up a PO, and we'll export it. All right, let's pick on number 42. So here we've got line items in our grid. So anything that's a grid is a right-click export to Excel. And there is all the line items from my purchase order right in Excel. Now, Jolene, it looks like we're right at the top of the hour here. I had a whole nother section to go on paperless office stuff, but in the interest of time, I want to be respectful of everybody's busy day, and maybe we should open it up to questions at this point. I'll defer to you.
Okay, Bruce, that sounds great. We'll now open it up for questions. If you have any questions, please enter them into the questions section of your GoToWebinar. And just to remind everyone, we do have a subject matter expert here. This is a great opportunity to have your questions answered in real time. And Bruce, it does look like we had one question come in during the presentation. Would these tips be able to be implemented in all versions of Sage?
No, Sage is, they're always releasing new features. So this is Sage 2020 right here. So anything that I showed you would be available in 2020 or 2021. Most of what I showed you would be available in most versions or any supported version, which is currently 2018 and up. So it just depends. So some of those features like the automatic journal update, I don't know off the top of my head what version that came out. That's a relatively new feature, which is why it's on our tips and tricks. The Excel export stuff has been around for a while. So that should work on just about any version, unless you're on a really, really old version of Sage, which would be one that's not supported. The task scheduler, a little bit newer feature, but still available in older versions of Sage even, so even ones that are old enough not to be supported. So most of what I showed you should be available if you're on any kind of a recent version.
Perfect. And that looks like all the questions we have, Bruce, so give me 1 minute as I take back screen control. Perfect. Thank you so much, Bruce, for your informative presentation and for taking the time to be here today. And thank you everyone for attending our webinar. Have a wonderful rest of your day.